So good afternoon. I'm happy to this opportunity to come and visit Panyaden School again, and I'm going to follow the pattern of previous talks with talking. Maybe I'll give the talk in English first, followed by talk in Thai, maybe about half an hour or so in each language, following which there will be opportunity for some discussion, questions and answers, alternating English and Thai. So I've been asked to say a few words about anger management, dealing with anger. And in fact, in Buddhist teaching, we look at anger within the context of like a spectrum of mental states, which at their most violent, gross, extreme, be out and out red-faced anger, perhaps erupting into violence. And on the other end of the spectrum, there is the slightest kind of blip or impulse, mental impulse of repulsion, moving away from an object in the mind during meditation. And with the training of the mind, the moderation of these the coarser impulses to consciousness, then the challenge for the meditator is to take the mind to a state in which it is not habitually or reacting to phenomena, either with grasping on to phenomena or pushing them away, and it's this which provides the necessary basis for insight into the nature of things. But today we're going to focus on the everyday manifestations of this mental habit, and I'd like to begin with simple observation that although we may often say he or she made me angry, that is really a somewhat dishonest or an inaccurate assessment of what really happens, in that nobody can make you angry, no matter what they do. There always has to be a certain level of assent. There has to be a volition to be angry on your part, and that is voluntary. That's not something that can be forced or foisted upon you. So to put it another way, whenever we're angry, there's always one part of our mind, one part of us that wants to be angry for one reason or another. So what is anger? Why does it arise? How does it arise? How to deal with it? Is there any situation in which anger is an appropriate response to a situation? I think that many people would at this point say yes, particularly in the case that one is facing an overwhelming enemy or overwhelming oppression, then many people in a long-term struggle against oppression, injustice, feel that anger helps them to sustain their opposition, their effort to change this unfair, unjust, oppressive circumstance. That is understandable, certainly, but from Buddhist point of view, it is ill-considered. The reason for that being that anger can only arise through a lack of understanding of the way things are. So to become angry, in other words, it needs a purposefully turning our back on certain elements of a situation or certain dimensions of truth. The point I would like to make here is that from Buddhist perspective, anger is never a springboard for effective action. That an angry mind is one which is a coarse mind, and one which is blind to the nuances of a situation, and one which lacks the ability to judge the weight of response, and a particularly most skillful response to a situation. And that equanimity or evenness of mind does not necessarily, does not ever really result in indifference. There is a crucial distinction between a clear, bright equanimity and evenness of mind and an indifference. And it is the equanimity, the evenness of mind that comes from a full comprehension of the situation, that wise and purposeful action will ensue. So here Buddhism is countering the argument that anger provides the motivation and the energy to persevere in opposing difficult situations, and to say that it is always mistaken, never has the results that you would hope from it, and that coming from point of equanimity allows for more flexibility, more intelligence in forming the optimum response to a problem. Now, in the question of generally why do we get angry, then the simple response to this, something we can observe quite easily, is it's frustrated desire. We want something and we don't get it. We want somebody to be a particular way. They're not the way we want them to be. We want somebody to do something, to say something, and they don't do or say what we want. And the stronger our desire to get something, to enjoy something, to consume something, then the stronger the anger will be when we are frustrated in that desire. So this is an important contemplation and an investigation of anger and aversion. So when you have that sudden sort of tensing of irritation when something doesn't quite go your way, you can see it in a mild way. Let's say you put your glasses down somewhere, and then you reach for them and they're not there, and there's that moment she's kind of tensing and irritation. Why aren't my glasses? Where I put them, because I want them to be there and they're not, even though you're the person who's put them somewhere else or forgotten them. But how often this immediate response of not wanting something to be the way it is, with a lack of mindfulness, rapidly escalates into anger if other causes and conditions prevail. So, to the extent that we are mindful and we are grounded in the present moment, then the occasions in which that those moments of irritation arise are much reduced. And if they do arise, they are cut off in the bud. They don't escalate in the same way. But working with anger and aversion and negativity is a long-term job. Not an easy thing to achieve. It begins, of course, to expand upon a point I made just now. You have to, first of all, what in Buddhism we call samadhi, or right view, and that's to say that we are wholeheartedly committed to letting go of anger in every shape and form. So that's like a guiding ideal of our life. Not saying, well, anger is okay in certain circumstances and not in others, and I'll keep that kind of anger and not have this kind of anger, because you can't make that kind of decision. You can't compartmentalize that kind of energy in that way. So if you have that firm commitment to the abandonment or the transcendence of anger and negativity, then it's a gradual process. Now in this gradual process, we have to attend to three different areas. First is in the external expression of anger, secondly is in the emotion of anger, and thirdly are the kinds of thoughts and attachments and conceit that allow for the arising of anger in the first place. With action and speech, then we recognize that every time we act upon an angry impulse, we feed that angry impulse and make it that much more likely that at the same time there is that same kind of trigger, that the immediate reaction to it will be an angry reaction. This is, we can say, the law of karma in everyday life. Every volitional action has an effect and increases a tendency. So every time you indulge and you accept and you just allow this sort of angry energy to take over, you're making that more and more a part of you in your life, just by a little bit every time. So you're strengthening anger through that volition. So to begin with, we recognize that we can't just decide not to be angry. We can't decide as an act of will to be kind and compassionate at all times. But what we do have the power to do as human beings is to say, however angry I might be, I will not abuse you, I won't abuse anybody, either physically or verbally. And that's a promise that you make, and that's a gift that you give to all of those around you. You give your family and your community the gift of safety and the gift of freedom from fear. by making that commitment to non-violence. So it's not a overly idealistic approach. You're not vowing that you will always be kind and compassionate in the future, because it's not possible to take responsibility for your emotions in that way. They're conditioned, they're immediate, they take us a long time to gradually reduce those. But by taking on a practice of not expressing angry, violent thoughts, physically or verbally, then you don't feed them, you don't add to them. And a new habit, a moral habit, starts to appear. So the volition not to abuse becomes so much what we call second nature, that the feelings of loving kindness and compassion have space to grow up and to flourish in our hearts. But that those feelings are not simply allowed to arise alone, they're also consciously cultivated. So in the realm of emotions, we systematically cultivate wholesome, virtuous emotions which directly counter, undermine, and replace the emotion of anger. And the habit, the mental wish for other beings to be happy and to be free from pain is one purifying emotion that gradually removes the anger and the violent intentions of the mind. Mindfulness, of course, plays a central role in that when you can be much more sensitive to the physical changes in the body that accompany the onset of anger, then it's that much easier to let it go right at the very beginning, because before it's become too strong. Another important virtue is that of patience. We call patient endurance or forbearance, and just ability to be with anger. So this is not a practice of repression, saying I'm not angry, I shouldn't, why am I not angry? Because I'm a good, kind person and I don't agree with getting angry. It's a recognition, yeah, this is anger, and I'm accepting fully that this is the emotion of anger, but I'm not going to express it. So we can, I think, fairly talk about a middle way here between expression and repression. So if there is suppression, it is merely suppression of speech and action. But there is a full consciousness of the emotion and recognizing it as a painful feeling. And one of the reasons why the defilement of anger is easier to overcome than the defilement of greed is that when we pay any attention to anger, we immediately see how unpleasant it is, and that is, of course, a big incentive in dealing with it. But although we are developing mindfulness and forbearance and loving kindness, we still have to take the further step of dealing with the thoughts, the ideas, the conceits, the attachments which provide the fundamental basis for the arising of anger. And this is the reason why only an enlightened being can be completely free of anger, although far before enlightenment we can substantially reduce it. But one of the chief conditioning factors for the arising of anger is strong attachment to the sense of me and mine. When you have that strong identification and sense of ownership over body and mind, then simultaneously with me and mine, we are confronted with all that is not me and not mine, and all of the conflicts that arise as a result of that dichotomy. That may sound a little bit philosophical, so let me repeat a story I've told here before about the man with the beautiful new boat, which he is rowing in the river, in the lake, and suddenly there's a crashing sound. He looks around and someone has carelessly crashed his boat into this new boat. The owner of the new boat is very angry and looks at, how can you be so foolish and careless, big lake, two small boats, and feeling very unhappy indeed. He goes back to the jetty, repairs his boat, and sets out again, and who would believe it, exactly the same thing happens. There's a crash, he turns around, his boat's been damaged by another boat, but on the second occasion there's nobody rowing the second boat. It's just floated out into the lake and crashed into his. Now, given that the damage to his boat on the second occasion is exactly the same as on the first occasion, do you think that he would be as angry? Or if it was you, would you be as angry? And if your answer is why not, is no, then the question is, of course, why not? So the Buddhist teaching is that we get angry because we create this idea of somebody who did that to me. And we can't separate this angry feeling from the perception, these rigid perceptions of self and other. But in the occasion that we see an empty boat, then there is damage, there may be damage and difficulty arising, but there's no sense of anger in the same way. And so how that applies to our reflection and contemplation is that we see that nobody is the owner of their actions in quite in the way that we think that they are. And we can have an insight into this through meditation at quite an early stage of meditation, in that when we have developed perhaps a certain measure of calm, and then from nowhere, as so it seems, some negative thought can arise, or it could be a greedy thought or a lustful thought or whatever. But our experience is that at the moment that thought, that emotion arises, there's no sense of a director or someone who's in charge. There's no owner of that experience, but that sense of me, my emotion, my bad feeling, or so on, arises afterwards. So this is paradox, which seems quite strange when it's related, but it seems obvious and common sense when you look at your mind a little more closely, is that whereas we say something is an owner, being an owner of something precedes ownership. In our actual experience, is the idea of ownership precedes the owner. So we create this sense of the owner, of the person, of the self, on top of the basic data of sense experience, or the basic flow of experience, to use perhaps a more poetic expression. So when we begin to see how anger arises through causes and conditions, and we see even if we are ourselves committed to a spiritual path of precepts and meditation and development of wisdom and so on, how difficult it is to reduce, eliminate mental defilements, mental toxins. And then we can consider further that how much more so for someone who has no conception of this kind of spiritual practice, is making no effort in their life to try to reduce or eliminate anger. They have no inner vision, they don't understand what is going on within their own mind. What can you expect? What more can you expect? And this kind of I think this kind of reflection is one that can lead to a very wise kind of forgiveness, not one based on an ideal that it's noble and beautiful to be forgiving, but to see that forgiveness is the intelligent and natural response to a clear understanding of what's going on in the human mind. Similarly, when we look at ourselves, we're angry with ourselves, we're unforgiving of ourselves about something we did in the past, then we can say, well, on that particular day, I had so much defilement, and I had only so much mindfulness, so much wisdom, so much restraint, and so much, and inevitably the power of the negative mental state came out on top over the power of the positive mental states. They'd rarely been developed at that time. So when we say we can't forgive, we feel angry at ourselves for things we've done in the past. I think when we step back from that and consider it's really just saying, I should have been somebody else, then I shouldn't have been who I was on that day. I should have been somebody else, somebody better, somebody more noble, somebody kinder, somebody wiser. But that's a ridiculous idea, isn't it? That yesterday or last year we should have been somebody else. Well, we weren't. We were who we were with that particular constellation of good and not so good mental states. So this is the kind of wisdom practice that supplements the restraint of action and speech and the effort to starve the food, the nutriment of anger, and also to nurture and to feed all of the positive qualities such as kindness, compassion, mindfulness, forbearance that oppose and replace it. So these are a few thoughts on the dealing with anger and negativity.
Okay, first question in English. Someone once told me that anger is a false emotion. While I didn't understand at first, I have come to agree with this statement. What are your thoughts?
How I would understand that in the light of my own understanding explanation is that anger can only arise through a misperception or a lack of understanding of the way things are. So the more clearly you understand yourself and the world you live in, the less anger you feel. So I would say it's false in that sense.
Please raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question. We'll pass the microphone around. If you have any questions in Thai, ภาษาไทยไหมครับ
มีคำถามภาษาไทยไหมคะ เดี๋ยวจะได้สลับภาษาอังกฤษ
Is
ภาษา
somebody
ไทย
here?
Okay. was wondering how to advise my 7-year-old who gets always angry at the same thing, like he's not allowed to have his tablet or the computer. How can I help him, like for a 7-year-old? Or the other example, it's an adult, a friend who I can see always getting angry at the same.
Yeah, adults are more difficult, aren't they? I think with children in particular, what you don't want to be communicating is that you're bad because you're angry, or it's a bad thing. It's a natural thing when your desires are frustrated. But can you see, so if a child wants a computer or something, you say, well, no, you played with that enough, or that's not the time, or something, then child's going to get angry, it's a tantrum or something. You say, yeah, it must be, I know it's really frustrating, isn't it? When you really want something and you can't have it, it just feels so bad, doesn't it? Yes, and when you don't have that power and that to be able to get something you want, that's really tough, and I feel that myself. But this is it. This is what we have to. So whether or not you can go into any more explanation at that time, probably the child's not in the space for that kind of thing. But what I'm suggesting is, most simply is, don't say don't be angry, don't get angry, or angry is bad, or Buddhists don't get angry. But you say, yeah, it feels really frustrating, doesn't it? When you don't get what you want. But and often just that sense that you understand and you're validating that, and that's enough for it just to fall away. And then afterwards, when it's you're both in a good mood or it's more appropriate, then you can talk about how how when we really want something so much, that we set ourselves up for this. This is what life is. That when you really put all your hopes in happiness in something outside of yourself, then part and parcel of that is that you can't manipulate the world to any great degree, and you're always going to have sometimes when you can and sometimes when you can't. But even when you can, then it's not such good news, because then it becomes a habit, and then you get addicted, or else you get even more upset. The more it becomes part of your sense of well-being, having like a computer. What happens then, for instance, if you have like Wi-Fi goes, or the electricity cuts, or there's, so in Buddhism we're saying that not by no means denigrating or criticizing use of modern technology as such, but saying that if our sense of well-being or our happiness is bound up with things outside of ourselves, then we're putting ourselves in a very vulnerable situation, and that it makes sense to be able to develop this inner sense of well-being, and then to be able to enjoy the material world more as a kind of a bonus, and things that we can enjoy. But if we can't have them, then it's all right, because it's not impinging on our basic sense of well-being. I appreciate this is not something you can explain in those terms to a 7-year-old, but it's just a kind of the general, underlying idea which can be adapted appropriately, maybe for someone at that age.
ภาษาไทยมีไหมครับคำถามมีภาษาอังกฤษเยอะแยะนี่นะครับมีไหมภาษาไทยไหมถ้ามียกมือนะครับโอเคต่อไป Okay, so we have quite a few English questions here, including one with a brand new word for me. Why is the awfulest anger? Why is it that the awfulest anger comes with my relationship with my mother?
Awfulest. How's it spelled? Worst. Oh, okay. I thought it was some kind of...
Awful with an S on the end.
philosophical term. Because we usually anger is strongest where there is most desire, and we have most investment, emotional investment in the people we love and the people around us, and they can give us the most joy, and they can be the most frustrating to us. And often in families, we say everyone, you know how to press each other's buttons. You know what things to say if you want to be hurtful. You know exactly the things that are the most hurtful, the most frustrating, and so that's why I think that there's so much awfulness and in families, because it's emotional minefield, isn't it, in a family? So I think that one of the things for children growing up, of course, is you want to be recognized as a autonomous, independent human being, and you feel that your parents are still looking at you as if you're a small child, and it's sort of the cry from the heart of an adolescent, as don't treat me like a baby, I'm a grown up. But I think that we feel that all through our life, that our parents are convinced that they know us better than anybody else, and yet we often feel they know us probably far, far less well than many people that we know, and they have very kind of fixed ideas about us that they formed when we were children, have never been able to adapt them and modify them, and so we feel this kind of sense of constriction, that they're seeing us in ways and relating to us in ways which we don't feel are authentic, and we don't really quite know how to express that and to go beyond that. I think I can see that in families quite a lot.
ต่อไปนะครับนมัสการท่านอาจารย์ Can you give some advice on how to lessen feelings of self-loathing, self-blame, and generally feeling overly self-critical?
Well, I made the point just now that when we look more clearly, if we, well, of course, the fundamental misassumption there is this me, this person who is worthy of feelings of loathing and dislike and so on, this independent entity called me, who's not very nice. So ultimately you have to face up to and really investigate, and who is this person? Does this person really exist? Or is it just something that I'm creating? It's a straw man or a straw woman. And if we are more precise about particular decisions that we've made, particular things that we've done, and particular things that we've said, then I refer to the words I spoke a few minutes ago during the talk, that we look into the causes and conditions that led us to act in that way, and see them in terms of dhammas, meaning wholesome and unwholesome dhammas, meaning in the relative strength of greed and non-greed, relative strength of anger and non-anger, and to see that it's just very simple. If you've got in a adversarial situation, if you've got an army of 100 and an army of 10, the army of 100 is going to win in most cases. And similarly, if over the course of the years or of lifetimes you've developed a very greedy habit, and when you're put on the spot and you're put under pressure, then that greedy habit is going to usually win out over the non-greedy habit. The angry habit is going to win out over the non-angry habit. But the basic Buddhist insight here is these are habits. There's nothing intrinsic, there's nothing like really you there that's fixed and there forever. It's all fluid. It's all contingent, and there's something you can do about it. So feelings of self-loathing and these are just foolish indulgence. It's just you've made a choice. If you want to make that choice to indulge in these thoughts of loathing yourself, it's what can I say? It's just the most foolish thing that you could possibly do. I mean, I've never met anybody ever in my life who is worthy of loathing. And I think that if you were to tell somebody else, I loathe myself because, they would sort of say, really, and they sort of think, is that, what can you have done? What can you do that is so bad that you can loathe yourself? And usually what it means is you edit the things. You all the contingencies and the mitigating factors and so on. You say, you feel that you're being very honest by saying, no, I'm not going to make any excuses for myself. I'm going to be brutally honest. It's like this. But that's not being honest, because situations are complex. We don't see things very clearly. We're always sort of a little bit in the dark we're groping our way through life mostly. And you make stupid decisions, yeah, of course. But that's just who you were. And question is, what are you doing with your life right now? Are you going to just carry that around on your back for the rest of your life, and not only make yourself miserable, but make everybody around you miserable as well? Then why? What for? So, just stop it. It's okay, who hasn't been stupid? I've been stupid plenty of times in my life.
You mentioned both equanimity and indifference. Can you explain the difference between the two? Is there ever a skillful way to have anger towards an injustice?
No, there isn't. Short answer. But what we do have is the source of passion in Buddhist psychology, or the way we understand it, is chanda, this wholesome desire. So if you see injustice and suffering in the world, and you have this passion and this fire to do something about it, that's very different from just being angry at this person or that person or this corporation or that group of, and demonizing individuals and institutions. I just think it's not wise, and it's not a creative way. But when you have you have an ideal and you have a passion, and I do the best I can. This is suffering world. It's not a fair world, and it's not a very intelligent world in many times. But you do what you can do, and then you let go of the results. And whether or not you can do anything about global warming or the iniquities of the capitalist system or so on and so forth, well, who knows? But you can, just make a little change. Just don't have to be so ambitious. Just do a little bit. Just do my bit. For these things. But why get angry? I mean, and if you ever have like people of my generation who was demonized, like police and the military and multinational corporations, and then one reason or another you meet like CEO of a multinational company or a senior policeman or army officers, and then this actually is quite a normal guy, he's quite a good person, just and then you realize how unfair you are and how much more complex the situation is. It's in so many things you get angry about. It's everybody is just groping their way, and it's just so hard to find monsters in the world. There's mostly people who have what you might say like misguided ideas and mistaken ideas and values, but most people by their own lights, generally speaking, are trying to do the best they can. That's my experience anyway. I mean, I deeply disagree with their principles and their maybe the way they go about it, but yeah, I would insist from my point of view that anger can only ever arise through a lack of understanding of a situation in all of its complexity.
Okay, I think this will be the last question. What does the Buddha teach about how best to make use of our human life?
Yes, big question. Basically, Buddhists believe that human life is good news. It's about as good as it gets, in that in all the different realms of existence, if you have any desire for liberation, freedom, then this is the best realm to be born in. If in heaven realm, it's just too sabai, it's just too pleasant, you get lazy. If in heaven realm, in hell realm, it's just so painful, you don't have any time or any interest in anything other than just enduring. So without going into Buddhist cosmology, you know, if you're at on holiday in a beautiful 5-star resort or something, sitting by the swimming pool, you know, you're probably not going to be that interested in some spiritual development. And if you're in severe physical pain, then you know you can't think of anything very much at all, except just wanting it all to end and go away. So in the human realm generally, we just have this like good mixture of ups and downs and pleasures and pains, and which lend itself to investigation and development. We have this capacity as human beings for making significant changes in our life and for abandoning the unwholesome and developing the wholesome and purifying our minds. And it's this practice which gives our life value, significance, weight and dignity, nobility. One other phrase that I've always found useful is one which is a part of almost every Buddhist ceremony, which we say, Pua Prayo Le Kwam Suk Ke Kapachal Tang Lai Talot Galananta. So it's for the benefit, for the welfare, for the happiness of all sentient beings for all time. This is the kind of the grand declaration of sharing of merit and dedication of one's life. So the answer would be most simply is a life which is dedicated to one's own happiness and welfare and to the happiness and welfare of others.
มีคำถามสุดท้ายภาษาไทยไหมคะ
ภาษาไทยเงียบเหมือนเดิม
So I think we'll draw to a close. Today, Venerable Jayasaro was talking about the importance of putting equal emphasis on the development of academic skills and the development of social, emotional skills in a school setting. Because at the end of the day we want to produce well-rounded individuals who are not only good at maths but also good at all those important life skills. And we have this conversation many times. And the topics like today is exactly the kind of thing that Venerable Ajahn shares with us and has done for the last few years. to help us realize this ambition to produce a school which equally develops these important parts of children. So I'd like to thank you very much, Venerable Jayasaro, for again coming and sharing with us these wonderful insights and pieces of advice for us to improve our school and ourselves as people. So thank you to Venerable Sangha Meiji and Venerable Jayasaro for coming today. I'd like to finish by bowing together.